This is Going Inside, Healing Trauma from the Inside Out. Hosted by me, licensed trauma therapist John Clark, Going Inside is a weekly podcast on a mission to help you heal from trauma and connect with your authentic self. Tune in for enlightening guest interviews, immersive solo deep dives, real-life therapy sessions, and soothing guided meditations. Follow me on socials at John Clark Therapy on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarktherapy.com. Thanks for being here. Let's dive in. Excited to introduce my guest for today. Jake White has a background in somatic experiencing and integrative energy medicine. He's been in private practice for 10 years and specializes in helping people recover from traumatic stress through supporting the body and nervous system. Jake works one-on-one through coaching and also leads group retreats and programs. Jake's also the father of 2 young boys and lives on a farm in West Virginia with his wife and family. He comes from a farming background, and his connection with nature has greatly influenced his search for somatic approaches to healing. Jake, thank you again so much for being here. What else should people know about you in terms of maybe expanding on that intro a little bit as to who you are and how you got here with this work?
I think I came to it, I think like most healers or therapists, like I was looking for my own healing initially. So, I think around 18 years old, I was struggling with a lot of like depression and, hypervigilance, dysregulation. And, I think initially in my journey, I realized that wasn't the way I was supposed to be. I wasn't supposed to live a life that was full of anxiousness and anxiety. So, but I had an awareness that it was like, I needed to, all these feelings were inside. That was one of my initial awarenesses. It's like, okay, I'm holding on to a lot of stress and tension in my body. So that took me into meditation. So I started to learn that initial, just how to get present with my body, how to like really quiet my mind down enough to be able to feel things. And then I started to get into more of like energy medicine and then somatic work. And then I think the somatic work really helped me a lot because it helped me to learn how to address things through like sensations and following my own nervous system. I think I regained a trust in my own body, and that my own intuition, and that I felt like, oh, wow, my body actually can take care of a lot of these things, and I can feel things, and that, it lightens and it doesn't stay anxious or, tense. And, a lot of my challenges at first were feeling like a lot of low self-esteem and self-judgment. And when I started to tune in with my body, I realized that like when I felt more regulated, a lot of that self-judgment started to release. And just realizing that a lot of that self-judgment was the way I suppressed my own emotions and like was able to like hide myself from people and protect myself. So once I felt more regulated, I felt a little more open and, expansive and more at ease. And I felt like, oh, that's myself. That's who I am. So, of course, that naturally took me into wanting to like offer that for other people and, help people learn about their own body and their own nervous system and, how to trust themselves again and actually feel comfortable, in themselves. So,
wow. This idea of trust and safety is something that comes up so much in working with clients, right? And and in my case, being a trauma therapist, right? And a lot of clients, I hear them say that they don't trust themselves anymore, right? Or like trusting their intuition, or even thinking about anxiety as this kind of misfiring of I'm constantly on edge and I constantly feel like something bad's about to happen. And when I've felt that for so long, it feels pretty true. And oh, by the way, something bad did happen and it might happen again.
That's right, yes.
So if you have a therapist who has maybe, let's say, a very kind of cognitive approach of almost like arguing with that anxiety, there's something about that internally that just still doesn't feel true or trusted. It's like a friend reassuring you of like, oh, dude, I'm sure you're fine. I'm sure nothing bad's gonna happen. It's like, what if? But what if? But what if? Or you don't know, right? You don't know if I'm gonna get assaulted again or whatever it is, right? So maybe you can, just kind of riff on that a little bit more. This idea of trust in self and kind of internal safety that you help your clients restore.
Yeah, well, I think if we don't feel safe, there's a reason, and you can't argue with that reason, if the body's reacting in some way, through like wanting to run or tensing or feeling more tight and anxious, that's a signal of alert and threat, so our body is sending a signal to us that, okay, we need to move, we need to get away from something. So, that might not be true in the present when we're always bombarded by our anxiety, but that information was true in the past, so I
Yeah.
think that's something we need to learn, is that this is an experience of my body protecting myself. you know yeah, it's a drag and it's a obstacle. It doesn't feel great, but that just learning that our body's trying to express something, it's trying to move through something, and that when we give that room, it's that protective response can move through our body, and that's what begins to actually, like, once we release that, then the body can kind of come down and feel safe and, settle. So, like, safety actually comes through that process of expressing through, our survival response or through our dysregulation, and then just realizing that we don't stay anxious, we don't stay in threat, that, we actually, it's trying to get us to somewhere, trying to get us to safety. We don't run from the tiger to stay in front of the tiger. We try to get away back to safety. So, if we're honoring these responses, we're following those natural cycles of being able to get away and then find a sense of rest and safety, afterwards. So, yeah.
Yeah, honoring those responses, right? Versus a lot of clients will come in and they'll kind of say, like, I want to get this out of me, right? Like, I want
Hmm.
to be done with
Hmm.
this feeling. I want to kind of
Hmm.
control this feeling. Like,
Yeah.
I call it the C word in therapy. A
Right.
lot of it's
Right.
like, I
Right.
need to control this anxiety, or
Hmm.
I need to make sure people don't know that I'm anxious. And
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
that piece around perceived vulnerability or weakness,
Yeah.
or what if I'm anxious and people find out,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And it's kind of a paradigm shift to actually, yeah, honor these feelings, these
Hmm.
sensations, to
Hmm.
trust that the body actually knows what to do if we can
Hmm.
help it along, or
Hmm.
completing this process that when we were traumatized, or in the event of being traumatized, that process couldn't
Hmm.
complete,
Yeah.
right? No matter if it was last week or in many cases, decades ago for our clients,
Mhm,
right?
mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I heard a teacher recently say the we don't protect ourselves from the past, we protect ourselves from the past happening again, and so that's in the future. So, it's like, yeah, we just need to be aware of that. It's like, it's these responses are preparing us for something happening again,
Yeah.
that we're always kind of treating, our nervous system is treating the present and the future as if the past is gonna happen. So, back to what you said about safety, it's really important to know that, like, we can move through those responses, and then, maybe we can have a new relationship with the present. Then, that does mean that we're a little more settled and a little more safe, and so we can
Yeah.
actually engage in the moment, not treat, the future and the present like the past is going to happen, in that, anticipatory response that we have. So, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So for many clients, I'm curious if you experience this. Um, like, if we just, as a blanket prescription, so to speak, say like everyone should meditate. But for
Hmm.
some people, the sensation of like closing their eyes and kind of going inside and focusing on what's happening internally is extremely distressing, right? And so we do a lot of things to not feel that, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Distract or drink or
Hmm. Hmm.
whatever, work a lot or work out, whatever it is, or
Mhm, mhm.
dissociate. Um, so in that case, like, how do you kind of start this process with your clients of reestablishing an internal safety, or even that piece of like when mindfulness,
Yeah.
using that term really broadly, like, can actually be too intense for people? How do you start with your
Mhm,
clients?
mhm. Yeah, a lot of times you're trying to find, kind of that edge. You're working more externally, first, not directly towards our sensations and in our body. So, a lot of times it's just like building rapport, talking, having a little bit of room just to get to know each other and talk. And then, there are a lot of processes where we can start to look at, like, where is this person's strength? I think that's
Yeah.
always the first thing I want to see with a client. Like, where is their strength? Maybe, like, witnessing their sensation, that's not their strength right now, but they're a good communicator, or or maybe even they have, you always get little cues, like they'll talk about their grandchild, or so there's you're starting to kind of pull those pieces in of those resources for the person, or there is some external like factors that they can really resource that is safe. And then from there, if we get talking about it and there's a little more comfort, then maybe we can take a moment and start to say like, okay, well, what are you noticing, in your body right now? And so it's like, then we don't start witnessing our body and relating to our body through threat. We're trying to first, let's relate to our body through safety and, co-regulation with a person and connection. So it can be like a really slow process of like, we're talking about these things, but then we're dipping our toe into it, and we're kind of starting at the edge, like where is the safety at first, and then we're not even trying to go towards trauma or stress initially. I don't know if
Totally.
you have that same experience. I'd love to hear your input too.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
I know. So yeah, I kind of came to trauma work through getting EMDR trained, right? It's just really a brain therapy, and it's a form of exposure therapy, and you're kind of reimagining this terrible thing that happened, helping your brain by stimulating both sides to help a memory go into long-term storage. Now, there's a physical response happening, and it can be super intense, and clients can get super flooded. This was kind of my first like trauma treatment that I learned years ago, like 2016, because up until that point, like a lot of therapists, I would just help clients talk about what happened, not knowing that sometimes that can be harmful, right? Or that can put clients right back into trauma, and then they're 45 minutes up and I'll see you next week, right? And they walk out of there feeling very out of their bodies, or very scared or angry, or whatever it is that's happening, right? So realizing that just talking about it is not necessarily helpful, right?
yeah, yeah.
Fast forward to last year when I discovered IFS, internal systems, working with parts that are wounded and carrying the burden of what happened, and then weaving in things with IFS. So weaving in IFS with EMDR, with some somatic work. There's a real somatic component to even parts work, right? Of when you imagine this part of you that was scared, and your family member was banging down the door and you were about to get hit, can you connect with that part of you? And it's a very physical experience, usually for my clients. Same thing for an IFS. We have this unburdening sequence, right, going in and helping that usually young wounded part of you, or that part that's kind of stuck and frozen, helping it, witnessing it, hearing its story, maybe having a do-over, bringing it into the present, releasing it of thoughts, feelings, beliefs that it's been carrying. So there's a whole unburdening sequence that, in my experience, is also very physical. The first time I went through an unburdening sequence as a client, working through some of my own trauma, it was so physical that I was like cold, I was hot, I had chills, I felt nauseous, right? It was so visceral to me. And it felt like my body completing this process. And I remembered in like G-Psych 101 watching a video of this gazelle who had just narrowly escaped some attack from a lion and went and laid in a tree, and it finished this physical reaction, right? It was like twitching on the ground and finishing it, and it took some time, and it looked like this convulsion almost, and then it was just kind of done with it.
Yeah.
Our problem is we have a different type of memory to where we store that memory. We're frozen in that, right? We finish the physical process, and then we sit looking at a computer for 47 hours a week and wonder why we feel so freaked out.
Why we can't pick up our head, and why we feel tense all the time. Yeah. I mean, it's just amazing when you go through a process like that. You feel the intensity of what your body's holding. What you're trying to manage all the time, like you said earlier, around like drinking or overworking. It's like that's the way that that's a container that we're creating for all those feelings that all those parts of us that are still connected to trauma. So we're really just holding on to immense amount of survival energy in our body. It's so taxing for us. And and then I think too, we hold that in a lot of shame and self-judgment too, and we don't, like you were saying, I don't want to talk about this. It's too vulnerable. And, so it's like, yeah, we're just, we have to hold that in a negative, really contained way and dysregulated way. So yeah, a lot of energy.
Totally.
Hmm.
This piece around,
Hmm.
in the somatic work you do as somatic experiencing folks talk about this idea of pendulation.
Hmm.
Maybe you can speak a little more to that. You were starting to mention that even with clients
Hmm.
as you're getting started, kind of dipping your toes,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
maybe you can say more about that and why that piece is important in the work, or especially in the event, or in the case of someone who's coming to you to work through trauma, and what
Hmm.
that looks like.
Yeah, like a healthy nervous system is able to do this kind of natural swing back and forth. And, in SE, we call that pendulation. So, like, it's able to kind of pendulate and swing into our sympathetic response or even towards like our freeze response. But then once
Hmm.
that thing's over and the event is over that's causing us to feel triggered, then our nervous system naturally kind of swings back into more regulation, into kind of a normal, like, everyday existence and how we want to engage with life. So there is that natural swing back and forth. But what trauma does is that we swing towards that sympathetic response, and the reaction in our body is so much, and then the event is so much that triggers that freeze to come in. And so it's like the body collapses around all that sympathetic energy. And so the nervous system isn't able to kind of swing back into regulation when it's safe. So, like, that's in SE, that's what we're always trying to create in some way, is that ability for a client to be able to touch into their stress response. Like, I had a client, recently, who they're talking about a parent, and all of a sudden their shoulders tightened, their neck tightened, all the energy went into their head. They were going into a sympathetic response. And so, I asked them, like before that, they were very regulated, they were very open and relaxed. And I asked them, well, can we go towards that feeling in the body that where you just felt really tense, in relation to that topic
Hmm.
we just brought up. And they were able to go towards it, and then they were able to release it a little bit and feel some of that temperature change and
Yeah.
some of the shaking. And then, all of a sudden, like, we were able to kind of reference back to that safety that was there beforehand. And so, we were just creating that pendulum swing back and forth, so we get used to that over time. It's like we can go towards a stress response and then, like, pendulate back and be able to find more regulation afterwards. So yeah.
So great. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really well explained there.
Hmm.
I also find that sometimes clients come in and it's like my teenage clients call it trauma dumping or
Hmm.
whatever.
Hmm.
They just come in and almost involuntarily just start putting themselves into
Hmm.
their trauma, kind of
Yeah.
flooding themselves.
Yeah.
They're so used to kind of doing that, and you can
Hmm.
see how flooded they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so interrupting that process, even like in a first session,
Hmm. Hmm.
and just prompting them is like, when you think about
Hmm.
your
Hmm.
dad, what's happening inside?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just for a moment, can you experience that? Notice that tension.
Hmm.
Okay, yeah. So just notice your shoulders did that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and even insist on continuing with the story of it, or
Hmm.
it might be,
Hmm. Hmm.
you gotta tell you the story of it, right? So you can help me.
Yeah. 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 That's right.
Interrupting some of that process and building some of that awareness,
Hmm. Hmm.
is
Hmm.
so important.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I like to look at it as like a river. If we're in our dysregulation, it's like we're in the river and it's like sucking us down, away. But, like, so if we don't have that, like, regulation and the ability to kind of slow ourselves down or ease, it's like we don't really have a foundation, like a bank to kind of sit on you know, where we're not just getting swept away. So I think sometimes we see our clients where they're very much swept away, and, in their trauma response and their
Mm.
dysregulation. So yeah. Yeah.
To the point you made when we first started around, well, like, so for instance, I remember when I was growing up, I would go for a long time without getting my eyes checked, and then I would get a new prescription,
Hmm.
and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know things could look so differently or look so much more clear," right?
Hmm.
Um, for folks that carry so much tension, or like you even mentioned when you were younger and you're 18 or whatever,
Mhm.
it's like not knowing that that's not normal, quote unquote, or that
Mhm.
not everyone
Mhm.
is feeling that
Mhm.
level of
Mhm.
distress internally all the time.
Mhm.
And I was certainly that teenager.
Yeah.
And so the label for me as a teenager was ADHD, right? Because I couldn't
Mhm.
sit still, so it must be an ADHD thing,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
No one
Yeah.
asked about trauma or
Right.
what I
Right. Right.
went through or what I was feeling. It was
Yeah.
just like let's medicate him so he can sit still, right?
Mhm.
When my body was
Mhm.
telling me to do anything but sit still,
Mhm.
right? And even today as an adult and going through a lot of my own trauma work, gone through
Mhm.
EMDR, gone through IFS,
Mhm.
and then a spaciousness that happens, or even after that unburdening I was mentioning, the spaciousness where like
Mhm.
my stomach feels open, my chest feels open.
Mhm.
um it's that it's almost like having new vision,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And then
Yeah.
things happen in my life and I don't fly off the handle, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Not everything is a threat.
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
I mentioned to a client recently of like, imagine for a second you're in the middle of your workday and you look down at your phone and someone important in your life just texts you, and you see a text and it just says, "Hey, can we talk?"
Mhm. 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 Yeah. Yeah.
Notice what happens.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what my response would be. So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in trouble. This is bad. Who
Yeah.
died?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's died?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if someone like I also mention, because I also have, like a loud inner critic. So if
Mhm.
someone is like, um, "Hey, can I share some feedback with you?"
Mhm. Mhm.
I have parts up around that like
Yeah.
right away.
Yeah. Yeah.
That tense up and get ready, and we're gonna defend, we're gonna fight, and we're
Mhm.
gonna
Mhm.
maybe get into this kind of debate about who's bad, right?
Yeah.
Or um, versus, right, like in IFS terms, when I'm in self or
Mhm.
accessing more self energy, more openness, more
Mhm.
curiosity, it's like I can I be curious to what this person is saying
Yeah. Yeah.
and be open to these ideas,
Mhm.
whether or not I believe them to be true. Of like, hey,
Mhm.
here's some feedback. Or even if one of my clients is like, yeah, actually
Mhm.
that session like didn't help, or this
Mhm. Mhm.
EMDR stuff, like I don't think it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me to
Yeah.
just hear that, right, and go, yeah,
Yeah.
tell me more about that. Tell me
Mhm.
more about how
Mhm.
it's not working.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and I should say a cue for me is what's my body doing,
Mhm.
right? So when they're sharing that feedback, am I feeling that openness, that spaciousness? Is my
Mhm.
stomach going like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
My throat is
Exactly.
tensing up?
Yeah.
And can I notice that and just be with that and reassure,
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
parts that are kind of bringing on this reaction or getting me ready for something?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I think it's like what you're saying. There's a kind of this opening or new lens or new perspective, like you're seeing differently. But I think regulation, it is an expansion. Like we're moving more towards our that regulated part of our nervous system, that social engagement system that is able to see, open up, and be more receptive to people, and you know um, what people have to say. So that opening towards social engagement is more of like yeah, it's taking in new information. It's a growth place, where if we're in our
Yeah.
sympathetic nervous system, we're needing to disengage from social interaction. We're in more of like, I need to run, or I need to fight this. So yeah, so I think it's so important to see that there actually is we are in a different place physiologically when we are opening up, and like what you're saying, when I'm more receptive to information, and like I'm more in a social engagement system. So what is that going to be filtered through? It's not going to be filtered through threat. It's going to be filtered through more of a sense of relationship and safety. I'm not going to be running away or avoiding. So that's been really helpful for me to understand. Like, if I'm not receptive and I'm really reactive, and that I'm starting to go into a whole different process within my physiology. I'm going into my sympathetic nervous system, or I might even notice that I'm not even there, and I'm moving towards that freeze, but I'm going away from regulation, away from safety. And I think we always want to learn how we can start to kind of bring ourselves back into more engagement, and just be more open and receptive. And I think we like get sucked down into like our aperture gets really small when we're dysregulated, and we can start to open up to take in more information. So
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Great.
Yeah.
Maybe you could share a little more about kind of why and how you chose somatic experiencing
Mhm.
as a model to learn. I mean, that within all these models, there's so many to choose from, and even for
Mhm.
clients, there's so many acronyms to choose
Mhm.
from. So
Mhm.
what
Yeah, yeah.
was it about somatic experiencing that kind of made sense to you and still
Mhm.
makes sense to you? And even what was it like to go through that training to learn how to do this work with your clients?
Yeah, I think it my draw towards it came from nature. I'd grown up on a farm, and like, so I was constantly around nature, around animals, and that was like kind of my first like source of connection was animals and nature, and like being connected to the dog or the cow. And my parents would always bring calves in the winter to keep them warm, and I was always there like with them and hugging them and kissing them and stuff like that. So um, but then when I learned that, oh, there was this technique that worked with the nervous system, the way that it described it about like wildlife and nature having these natural ways of releasing tension and stress from their body, that just really, really spoke to me, just being so connected to nature and outdoors and stuff like that. So yeah, that's really, I think, what drove me into it. Also, like with my client base, there were people coming in with these, just at that time when I was becoming curious about SE. Some people came in with some traumas that were really, really intense. And I just realized like I didn't really know what to do with them. I didn't know how to be with them.
Hmm.
And then when I started to learn about SE being like a technique that is not about overwhelming, like in re-exposing people to trauma, that there's a real need to take it really slow. And like in order to honor those natural responses of the body, there needs to be a lot of slowness and like teaching and regulating through that and being able to kind of touch into it in a slow, like gradual way. That really spoke to me with these clients that I saw that were just really overwhelmed. That maybe there was a way that I could do this safely with them and help them to process these things without being exposed to them. Because I just saw, like, kind of like what you said with your clients, like they came in so dysregulated. So I'm,
Yeah.
wow, we can work with this trauma thing. uh, so yeah, the training itself was just so experiential too when I went to it. And like immediately we were starting to practice on ourselves, and then practice with people and learning the basic understanding and the techniques. And so that really just drew me to it because I love experiential learning and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, I got a lot of, and personally for my own nervous system, I think that kind of drove me into it too, because I had these practitioners helping me too, and I was working on them. And it was just a real blessing to be doing it with people. I think trauma is meant to be done with other human beings. That trauma actually, like, we all have these experiences and it connects us with each other. So I felt so like I had these stories and this body and these feelings, but they were so connected to all these other people and the groups and the
Yeah.
training that also were learning together and growing together. So yeah,
So wonderful.
yeah.
Um, so I connected with you through Instagram. It was a like a recommended video
Mhm,
that
mhm,
the SE folks had like reshared of yours,
mhm.
and
Yeah.
you put together some of these really nice exercises that you're kind of
Mhm,
walking your followers through, and you've
mhm,
got a lot of people following you now
mhm,
and kind of learning from you. So,
mhm.
what's it been like to kind of share some of these techniques on Instagram, and maybe
Mhm.
while you're here, even plug your Instagram so people can see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I think I just offer what I do with my own nervous system, and then of course what I do with clients. So in those videos, but yeah, I just find, like, one of the things that I do is I lay down on the floor like at night, and I just let my body like shake and feel those different sensations, and I try to follow it. And um, and so that's a video like I posted, and I think a lot of people loved it, because it's just really practical. I think that's what I've always tried to gear my nervous or my Instagram towards, is trying to be as practical as humanly possible. Like, when I'm dysregulated, like, what do I do? Like, what should you do in those moments? How do you work with that response in your body? How do
Yeah.
you feel it? So that's just what I offer in those videos. So mainly it's just what I do with myself and clients, and what I see that really is helpful and works. So yeah,
So cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that was actually the video that I first saw, and I was like,
Mhm.
"What is this dude doing laying on the ground, and why
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
why have so many people like this video?"
yeah,
And then how simple it was.
yeah.
So
Mhm.
at Jake White Healing on Instagram, we'll put
Yeah,
links to
yeah.
this, of course, but yeah, lots of great stuff there. And I think in this world of kind of like Instagram, showing teaching people something in
Mhm,
just less than 30 seconds is a big
mhm,
part of how we learn, right? And how
mhm, mhm,
people are kind of looking for these nuggets of like, what can I do today to help myself, right?
mhm, mhm,
Um,
mhm,
so a lot of that stuff that I see you teaching fits well in
mhm,
that category of like
mhm,
a lot of people are really, really hurting and really feeling
mhm, mhm.
really dysregulated all the time, really
Yeah,
dissociated all the time, right? Or again, like being in my body, quote unquote, can feel really bad and really unsafe.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I want people to see their body as, like, it's something that we can help, and something we can move through, and there are tools and resources to be able to do that. We can constantly be supporting ourselves in some way, no matter what it is we're experiencing. And a lot of times it's the simplest thing we can do is the most effective, which is a lot of times just being with it and feeling it, and processing it and connecting in some way, and with ourselves in those moments. And it's like that we have a human experience that we need to live out. So
Yeah.
let's let it be there in the moment, and actually feel that human experience that we're having, and to see that that's connected to nature, and the earth, and wild animals, and that they can do it too. So, like, we can as well, and we're connected to that through our nervous system. So yeah.
So cool.
Yeah.
It's ironically just kind of being with the feelings, the sensations, the body, whatever kind of moving toward is, for a lot of my clients, it doesn't feel like productive. And there's a lot of these
Mhm,
values, even
mhm,
just
mhm,
living in the country where we live, where everything
mhm.
has to be like productive and maximizing. Like, what are we going to do
Yep.
about it? Right. What am I going
Mhm,
to do about these feelings?
mhm,
Right. Again, like, got to
mhm.
get them out of me. So for a lot of my clients, like this invitation to like kind of go toward, or even
Mhm,
again, in a lot of my work with parts is like, can you get to know that part? Can you actually
mhm,
invite it all the way forward? So let's say a
mhm,
part that
mhm.
carries anger, and a lot of times clients might come in and go, well, I had this fight with my partner and I raised my voice, and so now I'm here in therapy,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
There's all
mhm,
this
mhm.
shame.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so they assume that what I'm going to do is help get that anger out of you or
Mhm,
control that
mhm,
anger,
mhm,
right?
mhm. Yep.
And so I literally did this with the client.
Mhm,
So can you connect with that anger right
mhm,
now? Or
mhm,
when you connect with that fight you had and that anger that came out of you, can you find that in your body right
mhm,
now?
mhm,
Well, yeah, it's okay. Where is it? Well, it's like in my stomach. Is it okay? Just close your eyes and get to know it a little bit.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
Can you get curious about it, right?
mhm,
And start to
mhm,
get to know it.
mhm,
Why is it there? What's it trying to do for
mhm,
you? Can you ask it how old it is?
mhm,
Right.
mhm.
And then we're just kind of off to the
Yeah,
races with
yeah,
it, right? But
yeah.
they're almost confused. Like,
Mhm, mhm.
I hate my anger, and I figured my therapist would hate it with me too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
help me get this out of me,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think that's what we're constantly doing. It's like, this is wrong or bad. It's like, it's a way we're kind of like trying to ball it up and throw it in the dumpster, or something. But like, in that just doesn't work, because it's
Yeah.
creating more stress onto an already stressed out nervous system. And I think that's something I realized for myself, is like, when I hated something, like hated a part of me, or
Mhm.
hated a feeling, it was like I was already dysregulated. So when I started hating myself, it was like created more dysregulation. I was trying to reject something in order to feel better. And, that type of separation just never created any relief. It wasn't until I started to like accept it and realize that, oh, I can accept these things, and I can be with them, and I can actually maybe even welcome them, and, love them in some way, and I think that just goes right to the core of what a lot of these things come from. It's a need for nurturing. It's a need to be seen, or like a need for that dysregulation to be supported in some way. I think there's always, in trauma, there's this need for connection.
Mm-hmm.
There's this social aspect that we need, that in that trauma and that shame, and gets really, really disregarded and really like, pushed away, and held in like this really alone place, so yeah.
So many of our clients have this kind of worthlessness
Hmm.
burden, right?
Hmm.
I'm worthless, I'm broken. If people only knew X, Y, and Z about me, right, they
Yeah.
would leave me.
Yeah.
They would withdraw love, whatever it is. So a lot of folks, even some of my clients who don't have a trauma history, carry
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
deep inside.
Hmm. Hmm.
And over some months of working with me, perhaps they might tell me about it,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Or in fact, that
Yep.
client I was mentioning before with the anger,
Hmm.
right? So the first layer is like,
Hmm.
got angry at your wife and yelled, and that's why you're
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Yep.
What was really happening was a part that carries a lot of fear around
Hmm.
leaving me.
Hmm.
Or when
Hmm.
we fight, there's a part that goes, is this her leaving me? And if so, I should do something about it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But then that part kind of makes a mess of the situation.
Yeah.
And then another part judges what just happened. And
Hmm.
again, come in and there's this thick layer of shame
Hmm.
that is there in the room immediately. Like, wh- what does it mean that you're here asking for help? Or in my case, um, probably similar to you, I work with a lot of men. So this
Hmm.
layer of shame
Hmm.
around like, yeah, what's it like to be
Hmm.
here in the first place,
Hmm.
right? You had this big fight and you
Yeah.
were horrified with how angry you got. And
Uh-huh.
then your wife was like, go to therapy or else.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
now you're here, with your head down, like
Yeah.
you're in the
Yeah.
principal's office,
Mhm.
right?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that just by being like regulated, I'm sure your reaction to his anger was maybe very different than the shame. Like
Yeah.
you became curious and like and relaxed. And I feel that a lot with my clients. They'll talk about something or mention something, and I just feel like I'm really there. And curious, and saying like, oh, okay, well, yeah, what does it feel like to just be able to speak about that, and like talk about something that you haven't been able to talk about. And like a lot of times the client will say like, oh, I feel a lot of relief. It's like I don't have to hold that in. And and also like no one's telling me right now that no one's reinforcing that shame that I'm like kind of expecting and used to. There's a reinforcing that, okay, this actually can be here, and it belongs. And so it's nice to know we can be nice to ourselves and that it works. I think
Yeah.
such a blessing, to learn that. It's like if I'm really kind to myself, and that actually works.
Well,
you
it's a
know
paradox, right? It's like, again,
yeah.
most people, they think I need to be harder on myself, right?
Mhm.
Control anger, whatever it is, right? Like it's a lack of discipline,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
healing doesn't
Mhm.
work that way, right? It's like
Mhm.
if you were trying to help a friend
Yeah.
heal,
Yeah.
would you go and be harder on him?
Mhm. Mhm.
There's also a lot of that culture just in what we consume and in
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
this kind of like tough guy culture or whatever. Again, even just thinking about a
Mhm.
lot of the men I
Mhm.
work with around
Mhm.
like being efficient and controlled and
Mhm.
measured and
Mhm. Mhm.
infallible.
Mhm.
Um, and then all of a sudden I'm asking you to do something very different, which
Mhm.
is move toward it and honor
Yeah.
it. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's a shift for a lot of our
Mhm.
clients.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I know for me, with growing up around men, and like my father's, constantly like man up, and hold your head up, and so like every time I felt a sense of shame, or I thought like, gosh, there's something really wrong with me in the fact that I'm feeling this sensitivity, or feeling overwhelmed, like I didn't feel like I had it together. I wasn't meeting the expectations of what a man should be, and yeah, but I realized that that wasn't authentic, for me. Like not being with my feelings, that wasn't authentic. Always trying to be like my dad and all the other men in those examples of being tough and holding your head up, and that wasn't authentic to like a vulnerable, sensitive, like little boy and man, that. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think it was like, for me, it was redefining myself and, what that looked like for me to be a man, rather than, like, I'm sure you've gotten those messages too of what culture wants from
Yeah.
us. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I never saw my dad cry,
Mhm. Mhm.
ever, 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 not
Yeah.
even close to it. And
Mhm.
so, for me as a kid and as a teenager with a lot of feelings and big feelings,
Mhm.
I already felt like I was violating something,
Mhm.
right off the
Mhm.
bat, or
Mhm.
even being
Mhm.
told um, uh, that I was too sensitive,
Mhm.
which I've been
Mhm.
told my whole life, even to
Yeah,
this
yeah.
day. I was seeing a doctor recently, and she said this 3 times. She's like, "Well, you're a sensitive guy,"
Uh-huh.
and she was saying it in a negative way.
Uh-huh,
So I
uh-huh.
was like, I'm
Mhm.
keenly aware of my body for better or worse,
Mhm.
and so I
Mhm.
notice things like pain or a
Yeah,
medication or a
yeah,
slight headache, right?
right.
Um, but, hearing that label or even being young and hearing that,
Uh-huh.
ironically, that sensitivity is one of the very things that I need and use to be a good therapist, and
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
sensitizing myself
Mhm.
to my clients and the person in front of me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now there's the other side of that too, which is, I'm walking down the street and I see someone and I can just see in their eyes that they have a lot of
Mhm.
pain
Yeah, yeah.
in their lives, and I feel that, and
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
take some of
Mhm.
that on,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So there's that side of being a person who's, kinda tunes into people, and that
Mhm.
affects me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I can't just shut that off nor would I want to, but
Mhm.
also, again,
Mhm.
like, I've been told my whole life that, being sensitive, being a sensitive little boy was, um, definitely not a good thing, something that we needed to
Mhm.
work on.
Mhm. Yeah, I love how you see both sides of it, that it's like a blessing and a curse at the same time in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
yeah. How does that
We
feel to have both sides?
Yeah,
Does that
totally.
does that bring relief to be able to see it from all
I
those
I
different angles?
I think it does now, and really honoring that. I also, I have creative outlets in my life, so
Mhm.
I started acting. I became an actor a
Right,
few years
right.
ago,
Mhm.
and, there's an acting program called Meisner, and
Mhm.
literally that whole program is sensitizing you to the other person, right?
Oh,
So if I was talking to you right now, and we're
mhm.
doing, like, a scene, and I'm talking, and I look at you, and I can tell you're a little bored or you're yawning
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
you're getting bored, then
Mhm.
I'd be sensitive to that, and then
Mhm.
in Meisner, I would go, "Oh, you're bored.
Mhm.
You don't care about what I'm saying." You would
Right,
say
right,
that out loud because 'cause you're kind of
right,
acting on impulse, and a
right,
lot of good acting is just acting on impulse,
right.
right? Or if you're, doing a scene and,
Mhm.
all of a sudden someone's flirty, it's like, "Oh,
Mhm.
you're flirting now." You would be
Mhm.
sensitized to that
Yeah, yeah,
shift,
yeah.
right? Or you're closed off, like, maybe you and I are talking, all of a sudden you're kind of closed off to
Mhm.
something,
Mhm.
then I would notice that, and
Yeah, yeah,
as an actor, it's a
right.
good thing to be highly sensitized to
Yeah,
noticing
yeah,
that and
yeah,
being affected by that and
yeah.
going, "Oh, you're closed off now,"
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
you're not interested," because that's real, and that's me being affected, and
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
what they end up training a lot of actors back into is, like,
Yeah.
sensitizing yourself
Yeah, right.
when we've been trained for, at least in my case,
Yeah.
to desensitize yourself, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like peeling an onion. Yeah, yeah, I always found that when I was little really difficult because I was very sensitive too, but I always, since I was so dysregulated, it kind of turned into this hypervigilance, and I was so aware of rejection, and just people's faces and their postures, and and for me it just felt like, oh, everything got so big as a little kid, it was so exposing. So I mean, it just, like, it makes so much sense why I learned to, suppress those feelings. So, because it was just so much to, like, be that sensitive, so um yeah, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly we've got some overlap here.
Mhm.
We got a couple minutes left here, and yeah, time has flown by. Anything else you want to make sure people kind of know about? I don't know what we've talked about. Anything left unsaid, and then of course, feel free to say a little more about kind of the work you do specifically with your clients, and then how people
Mhm.
can find you and reach out.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, the work that I do is, like, I work usually one on one with people, like coaching private sessions. I do it online through through Zoom, and then also in person in my office in Winchester, Virginia. So yeah, it's always taking this nervous system based approach and kind of a body oriented approach to helping people to like regulate their nervous system, and then like be able to go towards some of that stress response that maybe hasn't been able to be like processed and moved through and and regulated. So, and just teaching them how to do that, with someone here to help guide that process. So with them, and I think I guess that's something I would leave people with, is just like the importance of having connection. Just to understand that trauma is something that we deal with alone. It's at the time when it was overwhelming. So it's just so important to be able to learn that we can deal with these things with people, and that our nervous system is meant to connect. It's meant to come out of stress and trauma. We're not supposed to live in that. We're supposed to move out of it and then be able to connect with other people. So just that really important component, that a lot of those things that we're holding inside that we're so scared of is actually, like you're saying, like parts of us that are waiting to be received and waiting to be connected. And, I think that's what that's what a practitioner or coach or a therapist represents, is that, that being that connection and that, sense of co-regulation, stability, for people. So I think that's what really, if I could put my finger on one thing that helped me through my own healing process, it was when I started to open up to help, and support. When I joined this group, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Like, though I saw a pamphlet, it said healing. I was like, that's what I need.
Man, I wish my marketing was that easy. Just,
exactly right.
just put healing on a pamphlet and people sign up. Great.
There was more, but I just saw healing. I zeroed in on that. But yeah, I stepped into this circle of people, of adults, and there were like 30 people there, and I sat down, and like I could just feel like, oh, I finally, part of me was terrified, but this other part of me that wanted connection and been waiting to just be like met and being able to express myself, like I felt this, it's like this deep exhale, and I just felt like, oh my gosh, I've been waiting for this, forever. So yeah, just like that, just I think being open to support and connection is like, a lot of times that's the first step in our healing journey. So yeah.
So much of this work is about hope, and a lot of an effective trauma is a sense of hopelessness, that I'm broken and I'm always going to feel this bad and this disconnected or this addicted or whatever it might be. That piece around hope is so important. And I feel like, in a way, in the world of trauma therapy, it is actually quite new and young, and people are like, hey, have you read this Body Keeps the Score book? Right?
Yeah,
Like, my clients are coming in saying that, right? And like, apparently your body has like a memory, and that's crazy. Like, yeah, I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So on one hand, I feel like a lot has developed in this world, tools we can offer in the world of trauma healing. And on the other hand, the best is yet to come in terms of what we can offer and what we understand about trauma and its impact. So in that regard, I'm excited for what we have, and also excited for kind of what's ahead. And that piece around hope is huge. Jake, thank you again for doing this. And yeah, great to have you and to hear about the work you're doing and how you got here. So jakewhitehealing.com, and then Instagram at jakewhitehealing. We'll put links in the description, of course. And Jake, thank you again for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's been great to be with you, and with your listeners too. So
absolutely. Keep in touch. Thanks again, Jake.
Yeah, you're welcome. Take care.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Going Inside. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, and share your favorite episode with a friend. You can follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at John Clark Therapy, and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarktherapy.com. See you next time.